This is the lecture for Derek Parfit's Personal Identity and Rationality, and we're going to talk about prudence. Each time I keep trying to record this lecture, I keep feeling like I've said this before, but I can't find the lecture where I did. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I said this sort of stuff in class, but whatever. So I'm just going to say it maybe again. Maybe this will all be new stuff. Uh, but so this article talks a lot about prudence, and there's two things to say. One is just to talk generally about the idea and how it relates to personal identity, and one is to say a little bit about how it relates to the topic for this week and next week, which is duties to future selves. And so prudence is the idea of like to be prudent is to kind of look out for yourself. So when you act prudentially, you do something that's in your own best interest. And when you don't act prudentially, you do something that's sort of bad for you. So we say it would be imprudent to take all your money and throw it down a hole because this will be bad for you. We say it would be prudent to save your money so that if there's an emergency, you're able to uh, spend money to help yourself in the emergency. So this is the sort of basic idea of prudence. And then the thought is that, uh, it seems like prudence is rational. If somebody is behaving very imprudently, they are doing something that is very bad for them. We often tend to think that they are doing something irrational. They are not acting rationally. And similarly, if we see someone behaving very prudently, we often think this is a rational thing for them to do. And of course, we can wonder about this, especially when prudence comes into conflict with doing good for other people. So prudence is doing good for you, but then of course you're not the only person. And so if you think back to at least Korsgaard and, or maybe not Korsgaard, maybe Jeske, maybe Wolf, maybe Korsgaard. I think maybe it was Wolf and Korsgaard. I don't know. At least some of the people we've read so far, we've seen this conflict between prudence and morality come up. I think Korsgaard may have called it the conflict between egoism and morality, or Jeske or Wolf may have called it the conflict between egoism and morality. But basically, egoism is similar to prudence. It's sort of caring about yourself or looking out for yourself. And sometimes looking out for yourself can come into conflict with looking out for other people. And so if you can do something very good for yourself, but very bad for other people, that would be like prudentially good, but morally bad. And so we might think, oh, it would be irrational to do that if, rationality requires us to be moral. And so it's probably going too far to say that rationality always requires you to be prudent. That's probably too extreme. But we often think rationality maybe requires you to be prudent, except when it would be immoral or something like this. That's kind of like the sort of common sense approach to these things. And the way Parfit ends up talking about this is that he'll distinguish like two labels or two kinds of ideas we could talk about. This is page 229. He calls one egoism and the other prudence. He sort of, I mean, you can just look at what he ends up saying about these things. And he ends up focusing on what he calls prudence in this article. And so prudence has a lot of relationships to personal identity because prudence is doing good for yourself or looking out for yourself. And then the question is, well, who is yourself? Who are you supposed to look after? So if you think about Williams, the question is, who do you want to get tortured after this experiment thing? Do you want the other body to get tortured, which is where your psychology is going to end up? Or do you want this body to get tortured, which is where you are right now, but it'll have a different psychology? Who do you want to get the money? Do you want this body to get the money or that body to get the money? And so this is like a prudential question we're asking. We're asking, like, from your own perspective, you want what's best for yourself. Who do you want to get tortured, this body or the other body? So that's a prudential question Williams is using, and he's using this prudence question to sort of track our intuitions about personal identity, because if you want what's best for yourself, you have to figure out like which of these people is myself. And we've seen this kind of like procedure used a few times, like people thinking about like what would be good for you or what would you care about for your own sake, to sort of think about what we would do with personal identity. Parfit talks about this, like in the teletransporter case, for instance, like would you be upset to learn that like this body's going to die, but you have a duplicate right over there? And of course, there's like, as he mentions in that reading and also in this reading near the end, there is, or not near the end, it's actually kind of near the beginning. There is a sense in which having a duplicate, like everybody will be a little happy with that because at least the duplicate will like carry on your projects and, you know, your friends can hang out with the duplicate and stuff. So of course, in some sense, everybody's a little happy with the duplicate. But like the real question is like, should you be a little happy but mostly sad because you're going to die? Or on Parfit's view, should you be like just as happy as ordinary survival, basically? And Parfit says the latter one. And that's kind of like a prudential question. You're asking like, from your own point of view, how happy should you be that there's a duplicate that's going to carry on? And you should be very happy, Parfit thinks. And that's a question of prudence. So prudence is pretty tied up to personal identity and what we think about this sort of thing. And then as this article is very clear about, and as we saw a bit in some of the earlier readings, prudence, and as I mentioned earlier in this lecture, prudence we usually think requires, you know, caring about your future self to some degree, maybe even caring about your future self as much as you care about yourself right now. In fact, the sort of typical idea of prudence is that, yeah, of course you should care about your future self just as much as you care about yourself right now. You're the same person. And then what Parfit is interested in is, I mean, does that make sense? And so that's the central idea of this paper. And that alone already gets us the link to duties to future selves because as you'll see, the idea that the future person is yourself, that's a little fuzzier on Parfit's view. It's not like obvious that they are yourself or that they're just as much as yourself or something. So that starts to break down. So up through basically page 240, so near the very end. So this is the second to last page. Up through 240, that's like most of what the article is talking about. But then there's an additional like way to develop this point, an additional point that Parfit makes at the end about how we might think about morality and prudence and revising prudence and replacing it with morality to some extent and things like that. And so there, he sort of like is straightforwardly talking about like very directly in the kind of language that we might already be using. He's talking about sort of duties to future selves and moral duties to future selves, which is exactly our topic in these 2 weeks. So yeah, that's just to give you a bit of a preview and some background for the topic of this reading.